This conference will now be recorded.
I know.
She's loving everything the last week.
Oh yeah, well, Biden's a great Texas. She lives in Texas. Oh, Texas is such a good move.
Like to California
Yeah,
or Pennsylvania.
go someplace where they will accept you. But she's constantly, you know. Well, my nephew's her oldest son is here. He lives in Portland, and something came out and said, well, Kansas City. Oh, she's going to St. Louis hopefully this week. Visit some friends. I said, well, stay out of St. Louis. You know, she goes, well, what's wrong with it? I said, they're getting ready to break a murder record.
Guys.
She goes, that's not true. Yes, it is too. And I said, that's why they defund the police. I said, so is Kansas. Well, you're not defunding. They're just doing no. When you take money away from the police department, it's called defunding. Then I said, let me.
Right.
It's the, Russ used to say, I have one brain. I'd say three-quarters. And I'm gonna tie three-quarters of my brain on my back and tell you, hey, you take money from one place.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance in a moment of silence. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Don't kick the chair. It's just right.
Item number 1 on the agenda is consider approval of consent agenda items.
Madam Mayor, make a motion to approve the consent agenda items.
Second. Look up when I say that.
We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call roll?
Bishop,
Yes.
Shriver,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Adams.
Abstain.
Item number 2, requests or comments from the public. There being none, we'll move on to item number 3, consider ordinance number 1060 regarding the underground placement of all utilities.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Tonight you have before you ordinance number, I thought it was 1060. You have 1061? Okay.
Yeah.
Looked up there. So ordinance number 1060 that relates to the placement of overhead utilities, any form of an overhead utility to be placed underground. We currently have an ordinance in our subdivision ordinance that does require underground utilities in residential subdivisions. We do not have that as a requirement for commercial areas, industrial areas, or any type of distribution or what are known as feeder lines. Sometimes those are used interactively. This ordinance would require that all future lines, again, we're talking power lines, cable lines, television lines, anything placed above the ground would be required to be placed underground. The city attorney and I have worked on this over the last 30 days or so. We've modeled it on other area city ordinances, Lenexa, Shawnee, Olathe, Lawrence, kind of pick your cities. Most have some form of an underground utility requirement. Again, this says that anything that's new or anything that's relocated. So existing power lines, existing poles, they stay. All right, we don't really have that to go back and require existing utilities. But if for some reason those are moved, i.e. a road widening, if it's a new subdivision, a new industrial area, a new something that requires new power, it would require those to go underground up to 35 kV, which effectively you go to high, that's kind of the definition difference of high voltage. Some will use that, but I mean, generally medium voltage, which is your transmission or your distribution lines, your feeder lines, or in that category. When you get above that, that's generally you're talking about transmission lines, or you're going from power plant to substations. We're talking about basically anything from substation out and below. There are opportunities for temporary. So, for example, if somebody's building a house, building a commercial building, those could have a temporary power pole, obviously. Again, we're talking about feeder lines and below. If it's above that, it may be subject to governmental regulation, ours, Kansas City, the Kansas Corporation Commission, others. So whatever regulatory powers that may be in place, those would be subject to. We're excluding radio and television antenna, and we probably ought to add in there cellular towers. I just thought about that. Looking at some of those, because those are obviously an above ground pole as far as the tower itself. So we may want to amend and add cellular towers. I'll let our city attorney, if she agrees or disagrees. Obviously poles that we use for street lighting or street, signal lights, those are generally served by underground power. Any of the items that you would see typically related to electric power. So you might have transformer, the ground mounted transformers, there's switches, there's any number of things that oftentimes set above a telephone pedestal. Those types of things are still permitted. And then we do have a provision in there for variances. So if there is something less than the 35 kV and there is a unique situation, they could come back before us, similar to the way we handle a board of zoning adjustments, and say, we need a variance to this ordinance and here are the reasons why. But just like a variance to a zoning, it there has to be something to support it, and being financial only in nature, i.e. it just costs too much, or I've already done it, sorry, can I keep it, which is the self-imposed rule. Those two do not get you a variance. Now, it may be the cost is part of that. Maybe it's an area where there's a rock cliff. Maybe it's conflict with KDOT or some other item that could trigger this variance. There is that option in there. Again, those would come back before the city council. Otherwise, our recommendation's approval of this ordinance. Again, the city attorney has reviewed this. We've had some discussions also with LKM just to get their input. And I don't know if you have anything, Lisa, to add to what I've just said as far as other area cities and the processes that we intend to use.
I think regarding a small cell, there's a separate state statute regarding small cell that's going to probably preempt anything with this. So I think we're probably okay with small cell that's always on top of a pole. There's usually a cabinet for equipment next to the pole. Some cities will require that to be underground. That's usually a fairly big battle, but most have it be above ground, quite honestly. So I think that statute probably takes care of that regarding small cell. This ordinance is in keeping with what we see in area cities. Part of it is a little bit more rigorous than some, but it is generally the same spirit and intent that we see from other cities in regulating our right of way as much as we can.
What parts are more rigorous?
Some cities are silent as to relocation underground requirement. If it's above ground, you relocate above ground. So they will be silent. I can't find where they're regulating that. This explicitly says this is our intent, that it's going to be underground in a relocation situation. So to me, it's just a little bit more clear that that's our intent.
Probably a good example of the relocation, 110th Street. If they put new poles in. We talked about underground. We tried to encourage it to be placed underground, but they went overhead until they got to the corner, and then they went underground to get through that area. And you'll notice they have a couple of what called sectionalizer boxes on the corner where they pulled the wire underground and then continued it as they needed in their power grid. So it wasn't a matter of whether it could be done, because clearly it could be, because they put it underground partly. It was really just their preference of going overhead with that kind of line. And that is what I would call a traditional three-phase distribution line, right? So it's got typically 3 or 4 wires on the pole, and then on below the pole there may be other utilities. In that case, AT&T was currently under. It was not AT&T, Verizon, Spectrum, Verizon. They were underground. They wanted to go above ground, and basically through negotiations we kept that underground. An ordinance like this would just simply make it simpler for us to say, here's our regulations, you're in the right of way. Or they could go by their own easements, but they still would be subject to this ordinance. So the ordinance is not simply right of way, it's all utilities. Mostly it's in the right of way.
Mike, have we done a cost analysis of going underground compared to the normal overhead for like power for like a new development of a single home?
Sure. Well, not specifically. I've read a number of articles about that. Generally, the utility companies will tell you it's 10 times more expensive. The trade journals generally say it's somewhere 4 to 6 times. So there is an additional cost with underground, and mainly the issue. Now, there's offsetting maintenance to some respects, right? They're not subject to getting blown down, blown over, et cetera, and so forth. But they do have to deal with the heat because the power line generate heat.
Right.
But as far as a specific cost of one versus the other, and sometimes the way the power companies work, if I'm coming in and I'm building something, they look at what's my revenue generation, how much, if I extend power, how much revenue am I going to generate? And part of it is they have a certain amount they have to serve, a certain distance and things. I was trying to pull that up earlier. But really they look at the revenue generation, and then they say, okay, your 4-story building office is going to generate this much revenue. The cost to bring power to it's this. We subtract one from the other, and then there's what you might owe in that. So generally in residential, it's built into the lot cost versus a separate charge that the owner would ever say.
I was just thinking of somebody who was building on 3 or 4 or 5 acres,
Right.
And if we had just a rough estimate, but like you said, 4 to 5 to 10% increase.
Yeah. That's generally where the literature, again, generally utilities say it's a lot higher, and most of the others say it's, it is higher. There's no doubt about the cost being more. I say there's no doubt. I'm not in that business, but most of the readings talk about that it is more expensive to go underground than overhead for the initial installations. I would, pieces of it may be more expensive. I don't know that it's significant. When we built our lift station up north, we had to put all the conduit in. We actually had to put 2 different pads in, one for 3-phase, one for single phase. And, I don't remember what the total cost was, but it wasn't in the scheme of the total project at $20,000-$30,000 on a $1.1 million project. So it wasn't significant in that particular case. Now there's overhead power back, and then it goes underground there's a billboard and other things. It's all underground.
Just for clarification, it's not 4, 5, or 6 or 10%. It's times.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
It's times.
That's what the literature generally says. Right. Now, again, I didn't get a chance to read anything that says, and here's the 10-year or 20-year payback on underground. I don't have the poles being hit, or I don't have the storms knocking them down. I don't have the wires falling. I don't have to deal with, some form of damage to those. And again, some of it clearly is the, appearances in neighborhoods and streets and things of that nature.
Mike, on the initial page here, it says new or upgraded. If somebody was going to upgrade their service in their home from, 60 amp to 200 amp, are you going to require them to go underground?
No.
Okay.
No. If they're just upgrading their service, that's not the intent.
Well, they're going to run new wire too, because if it's 60 amp service, they're going to they're gonna have to pull more wire in from the pole to the house to upgrade to 200 amp.
Yeah,
So-
I don't think that's the intent is not in that. Now, if they put a whole new, they totally abandon everything or they're upgrade or building a new house, then yes, that would be underground would be the intent there.
But could we put something in there maybe that says if you are upgrading your service to an existing home, you do not have to go underground from the pole to the house?
I'm sure we can.
I just think that later down the road, maybe you're not here, we're not here, somebody's
Right.
here, and they're, hey, the thing says this. I'd like to see that clarification.
So effectively, if there's existing poles, that is just providing the service so the house, I'm going to guess, so the house is 1,000 feet off the road and there's 2 or 3 poles set to get it from the road to the house. Now, it could be underground and then come up the pole and then go overhead. But that's what we're talking about. Now they want to go, they need to pull one more wire because they need a larger gauge wire.
There's usually a transformer on the pole,
Right.
and then they'll just change that out and run that to the house, to the weatherhead.
Okay.
I don't want to have somebody that's barely going to be able to get a new service. I'd rather see the new service in their house
Right.
than than leaving the old services, because there's so many bad things about these old services. So, like from the pole, from the transformer to the house, maybe something like that we could put in there.
So maybe like an H under exceptions. Like just add one more to the exceptions.
Yes, I would think so.
I think we have a good example of that at the corner of Richland and 102nd. That house has been completely redone and added on, and they just put new service to it. And it's not nearly that far from the road, but it's overhead, and it seems like that would be a pretty strong, heavy burden for somebody that's just trying to improve their house.
Yeah. I mean, it's expensive. I mean, you have to hire, you can hire 4 different contractors, to do that, trench the hole.
Yeah.
Then you have to pull the wire, somebody to pull the wire. Well, most electric companies do that. A lot of times they sub it out, but it gets a little pricey.
And it's higher priced wire that goes in the ground.
Right.
Versus what's overhead.
Yeah, because it's a 4-inch conduit.
Yeah.
And depending on 200 amp service, it's
I think it'd be good to put provision.
Yeah.
In there for that.
And just to clarify, Mike, did you say it would be possible or not just to have new residential and utility? Like, is there a way to pull out existing residential from this, or does that need to be because it just you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
if
I
it's
think
an
so. In
upgrade
some of the ordinances I read, and again, the city attorney may have seen these too. There was some discussions about where there was an existing service from a distribution system that was exempted from requiring pole for that to be placed underground. But I think we could add an exception in here. We just probably want to make sure we craft it properly for existing residential services, not necessarily any and all services, right? So,
yeah.
or hey, there's a power line out back that's serving that house. I want to come and now build my power line over, but I'm building a new house or I'm building a new something, and not be able to take it from an overhead and create a new overhead service. I think that's what I'm hearing.
If you build a new pole barn on your property, it's got to go underground.
Okay.
But the one from your house, it's existing. I would.
Right, if it's existing, right.
And if you tear a house down, obviously you're going to be building a new one, so you go underground.
Right. Okay. Ms. City Attorney, are you? I think we can craft something to that.
So
Part of the impetus for this is obviously the Evergy project, bringing power over to Bonner site. We're looking at eastward on Riverview on this particular view. How would that view change with this ordinance?
Well, I don't know that. I mean, you have, it looks like you have a number. It looks, and again, I'm not to the right side of the road appears to be the cable service right, because of where it's at on the poles, and those may be owned by AT&T probably. And then on the left side, you have both power, because the power is always at the top, right? And then below that is the lower down, you see 10 or 12 feet down is another cable, which again is probably
That's Spectrum.
Spectrum is cable or fiber on there. Again, most of the Spectrums, AT&T, Verizon, generally speaking, they rather go underground when they get the opportunity to. I mean, that's just been my experience. I would say 100%.
But will it change that? Will it change anything on if they go through and put the line through underground? If they're running over there.
It could really go both ways, I think, right? Because there are services from some of these poles, and so they'd have to figure out how the service gets from the pole to the home, right? Whichever way it's going. And then, it would, I don't know what their plans are on Spectrum if they intend when they come through, if they came through in a traditional setting and put new poles up, they obviously have to relocate their cable, their fiber, and they very well may just say, at that point, we'd rather go underground. They're probably more worried, and I know we're gonna have other discussions about right of way and right of way access, right? Just where are they gonna go, and not, they're normally concerned about, we don't want to put it in the ground and move it 6 months later or a year. That's generally what I hear from the utilities is they're more concerned about moving things multiple times than they are, to some respect, overhead underground.
I share Mark's concern because I've got a neighbor whose line goes back a couple hundred yards.
Right.
And just to run Spectrum wants $5,000 just to run a cable line back to the house.
Yeah.
Above the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's going to expose our citizens to any kind of an expense
Right.
on their existing, I'm totally not in favor of that.
So would that be included in the exception?
That's completely not the intent of the ordinance. So that would be something that would be an exception.
But I agree with Mark.
Right.
It needs to be stated.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It'd be consistent with this ordinance.
Yeah.
I think I hear what the concern is, that it would transfer some expense to a property owner, right? I mean, clearly there's, in all true fairness, right? I mean, the power company, if they pay for it, let's say there's an expense, and they're going to put those expense into their next rate case. That's what they will do, right? That's the system that they work under, right? And then that doesn't go to us, right? We don't have authority over rate regulations in Kansas, so it goes to Kansas Corporation Commission, and they determine whether their expenses are valid and whether there's a fair return on their investment. That's really what they look at.
Well, it's kind of like we talked about in the past. If you run a sewer through an area, you don't want to require, the investment of a homeowner to put in $20,000 or $30,000 to connect to the sewer if they have a working septic system.
Right. But once that septic's no longer working, or there's some change or some alterations, we say at that point, yes, you have to do that.
Yeah, correct. I think it just sounds like we're remaining consistent depending on whatever service is being provided. We're consistent with how we handle it.
And my understanding is, like, our concern is more on the property owners of Edwardsville. We're already, the utility companies are already putting their utilities and their wires underground, as we see on the pictures on the left, that look a lot cleaner and more up to date than when you drive through our city. So we're already paying to have utilities underground. We're just not paying for it here in Edwardsville. We're paying for it throughout the metro area. But we do want to make sure that it's not overly burdensome on our residents and property owners.
Right. I can give you an example. So down on what we call the 93rd Street extension down where the Kincaid project, that's what we generally call it, right? So you got overhead power on Wood End. It's a 3-phase power. It really is kind of a feeder system there. they're going to pull from one of those poles and then go conduit underground. There's some what they call sectionalizers, right? So kind of like an underground pole, right? They got to come over to a point. They're generally set above the ground. They can bring the wire up, another wire down, and then they take the power over to a pad, and the conduit and the pad. So the developer is responsible for the conduit and the pad, right? The power company pulls the wire, puts in the transformer. And in our case, since we're going to have a lift station down the road, right, some of that cost is covered by the development, but just like we had to do up north. So we'll have to provide a pad. And from the pad, we'll have to take power to our meter service and then meter service into our lift station. And that's our cost. And that's all underground. And again, that I would call that fairly typical cost of operations. Clearly our most current, most recent subdivision is Williamson Farm, right? All that utilities are all underground, right? Every bit of that was done. The new one being built, the townhomes, that's all underground, all covered through that and gets recovered in lot costs. And so, technically there was a requirement because it was a new residential that it had to be underground. So I don't think we're out of step in this thing. It's just maybe this additional exception on how do we treat existing services for existing residential services. In theory, you could have it in the commercial side, but most commercial has been underground, for many. I mean, if you look at the, Dollar General, right, that was all put in underground. That's new. Everything on K32, all those services were put in underground. I mean, I think it's more of the accepted standard to put those in. And then, of course, right of way, somewhat you're referring to here. But I mean, you can drive along a number of roads and all of their lights and things of that nature are all it's all powered by underground utilities. So I don't think we're, if anything, we're behind the times on this thing. We're certainly not blazing a new path here. So I think we have plenty of examples we can look at and bring it back at your next meeting with those revisions. And I wouldn't want to try to craft it here tonight, but we can certainly bring that back for the next meeting and work from there. If that's the direction of the council.
Yes. We don't need a motion for that, do we, Mike?
I don't think we do.
So.
I think we got the consensus of the council. We're good.
Excellent. Yeah, we're way behind.
Moving to item 4, here a presentation regarding right-of-way acquisition for future city projects.
Well, this is it on. This is somewhat on topic, but I want to caution that these are really kind of two different issues. One is around any utilities being underground. The second one is managing our rights of way, which obviously involves utilities, but all types of utilities. So really So anyways, this is really a two-part discussion. It's really about understanding rights of way, how we manage rights of way, whether it's project wise or otherwise. And we've had this discussion in the past to some respects about getting right of way acquired ahead of projects. I mean, it helps us in planning, it helps us in grant funding. It helps the property owners know when something's going to be out there. I know, we had some discussions in the past about 102nd Street. I think it got off into a different world because all we ever did with 102nd Street was do preliminary plans, and we were going to do right-of-way acquisition. We never funded a project to build anything on there. But where it helps us from a planning standpoint is we don't want somebody to build a house and then we end up with a road or something 5 feet from the front door. So that's what we're really trying to talk about tonight, is kind of the management of right of way. So two definitions that are important to remember is there's public right of way, which, as this says up here, right, that really is something that it's owned by the governmental entity. And that's where users, both the city and others, through franchise agreements, have a right to use that space. So we have franchise agreements with all of our utility companies, really except water, but and so they pay a fee, and for that fee they get a right to use our right of way. But it's property owned by the city, managed by the city, right? So we kind of maintain control. There are then easements. There's a number of types of easements out there. Most of the ones we deal with are utility and stormwater easements. So clearly stormwater is what it is. Typically where we get those kind of easements, where we've got a large crossing, say a Betts Creek or something like that, and those storm boxes may go 20, 30, 50 feet past the right of way, so the water gets discharged, and those are in some kind of stormwater easement. It could be a place we hold water. There's also private stormwater easement, but here everything we talk about is public. And then a utility can have an easement. So there is public utility easements, which we just refer to as utility easements, which gives anybody that has a franchise a right to use that. You can have specific easements. For example, when we put in our force main in the UG going across, when we went under the highway and on the north side and connect, that is a sanitary sewer easement, which means the only user of that is the city of Edwardsville for sanitary sewer purposes. If we elect to let somebody else use it, we can do that. The water company has a number of those, right? BPU has a number of private or public utilities. So easements give you a right, but they don't take the property. So you as a property owner still own the land, you own the surface, you're giving somebody a right to use a portion of the underground part of a portion of your land, and you give them right of access, but you're not giving up your land. That's really the two differences. For us, these are the general requirements that we use for right of way. So arterials in our subdivision ordinance is 100 to 120 feet. I don't know that we have any that are 120 feet. Maybe Wood End Road. There may be some spots down there at intersections, but generally these are going to be your 3-4 lane roads, 12-foot lanes, may or may not have curb and gutter. So the examples are Wood End Road from 98 to the highway, and 110th Street from I-70 south to approximately Speaker Road. Right? That's the two we have, though Edwardsville Drive for us is considered 110th, Edwardsville Drive, 4th Street is considered an arterial, but we know from any number of studies there's just not sufficient space for 100 feet. And even when we did the improvements on that southern part of Edwardsville Drive, we had more right of way on one side of the road, less on the other. So we used a combination of right of way and utility easements to incorporate that in there.
Is that 100 foot start in the middle of the road?
50 either side. Generally you do section lines
Okay.
off the center line of the road. Now, sometimes that's, a couple of things. Sometimes those center lines of the roads are off.
Yeah.
And so you might work it from there. We've had a couple. Riverview is a classic example. When we went through the intersection down there and on the north side, the road was already skewed to the north a little bit. And so when we added lanes, they actually got added on the south side just because it was skewed right through that area. If it's a section line road, so this is pretty typical in most states, Kansas. So everywhere there's a section or a quarter section, there is 20 feet, a section line or a county line road, right? A county road, 20 feet on one section and 20 feet on the other, or quarter section, right? So just automatically there's a 40-foot right of way on every quarter section line, half section line, just by they call them a statutory road. Those cases, you generally find the center line, the section center line, and measure from there. But the section lines don't always match up. For example, Riverview Road is not on a section line. The section line, I think, is a little bit farther to the south. Some are, some aren't. It just kind of depends. Collectors are probably our most common that we work with as far as major roads, right? That's your 94th, 98th, 102nd, Kansas, Works, Riverview. Richland could be in that group. Typically 80 feet. Generally are going to be 2 or 3 lane roads. They generally have medians in them. Maybe have sidewalks in them. Again, exactly what we're doing on 98th Street. And everything else is kind of local. Now that could be a residential street. That could be, maybe a small road. 100th Street is a good example, right? We'd call that a local street, right? It serves only very limited local traffic. There's no connections to it, right? It's not collecting anybody and taking them to some other place. And I know you've heard this past, and these can get subdivided into different types, but these are generally when we get a project and we're looking at them, we kind of say, okay, this is a local collector or arterial, right? And we have standards around all of those, and I'm not trying to get to all those tonight.
And are those set by the state or internally?
Locally,
So we set them
by
as a
ordinance.
city. Okay.
So it's in our subdivision ordinance is where that's currently located at. So, but again, we have some that we may call collector. We use 80 as our standard, and then realize, hey, we need to push this to 70. Again, most of the right of way is not used by the road. It may be half at most, right? It's everything else. Stormwater, you don't think about it, but it's hard to lay things on top of a stormwater pipe. So you lose, generally about 3 from back of curb back, 3 or 4 feet. If you have stormwater pipe, you just don't have much else because it's not that deep, right? It's not like really deep, so you can't really plant things above it. Sidewalks use up stuff, but you could put utilities under sidewalks, but if they have to get to them, then they got to catch your sidewalk up. So think about it. It's more about planning the total width, and we try to use a combination there. This is really, and you may have seen this, but this is really a good diagram of the public right of way and what is in public right of ways, and fairly typical of how it's laid out. Again, the road is in the center. Oftentimes sanitary sewer will be in the middle of the road. By that, we're talking about gravity flow sewer, because you can get in a manhole, you can do most of your work from there, etc. You don't have pressure. You don't generally worry about something, like a water leak breaking. If you can keep them out from under the roads, it's not a bad idea, because as you notice, then you have sewer taps. So if it's out in the middle of the road and you need a tap and you need a tap and so on and so forth, all of a sudden you get 5 or 6 cuts out in your road for every single tap. Now, new subdivisions, what you typically do is you put those taps in and you run them to the edge of the road when the sewer goes in before the road's ever finished. That works really well. But when something new comes along or something else, that's the problem that you get. Gas line is out there somewhere. They generally don't like to be under roads, right? They tend to not be. We know water lines, and water lines are probably the one that causes the most damage just by the nature of the beast. You got pressure, and when they break, you might not see it for a long time, but as water is a force, right? So it tears things up. You got your electric. In this case, it just happens to be, and this is from City of Liberty, Missouri, but you can look at a lot of cities, they use the same one. The power is underground. They're showing it behind the sidewalk, cable TV, all these others. So you got all this stuff in your right of way that we are trying to manage, which is why you need the extra space. So as much as possible, keep them out of the road, put them outside the road. Some things can't be together, right? You can't lay the water line next to the sewer line. Gas lines don't generally like to be next to electric lines. Stormwater has to be pretty much where it's at because that's where the inlet boxes are on the roads. If you have that type of deal, even if you have an open ditch, you got the same problem. You still use up a lot of space. It actually uses more space when you have an open ditch section than you do curb and gutter. It's less expensive to build, but it actually takes more space typically, unless you want really steep slopes, which are not safe, and most people don't like it because they have to mow it and they don't like to do that. So really what I want to spend a little time tonight is on acquiring property and how we go about acquiring property. So I'm going to talk about the traditional method and what I'm going to call the open method. The traditional method is pretty much what we have used for projects. And when you have KDOT involved in federal dollars, they have a very succinct process, right? So if you've already acquired it before the project, they're okay. I mean, whether you get it through platting, whether you get it through some other donation mechanism. Once you have a KDOT project on there, they have a very specific process. And this follows that pretty closely, which is, right, you got a project, you know, we've got 40 or 50 feet and we need 80 feet. And so we go, well, we're going to have to buy 15 or 20 feet on either side of the road. We get the engineer, surveyor, actually go out there, survey it all up, draw up descriptions, give it a legal description because you're buying real property in this case. They get all that together. You hire an appraiser, they come in and they do an appraisal. And again, these appraisals are different than your typical residential home commercial appraisal because they're not looking at what revenue you're going to generate. They're not looking even at market value to sell the whole thing. They're looking at what's its current value, and after you lose this 20-foot area or whatever, how does it impact the remaining of the property? Some cases it may be nothing. Some cases it actually the project may improve it. That being said, you can't use those two methods, right? Even if it improves the value of the property, you can't say, well, since it improves the value of the property, we're not going to give you any money. Generally speaking, if it has negative or zero impacts, you generally will pay something because there's still a taking of land. It may be minimal on the pricing. So you get the appraisers. When the appraisers get done, they turn the work over to a right-of-way agent. That can be a person from the city. If you've got to have a certification in right-of-way acquisition. Again, follow the processes, lots of notes, lots of time, lots of energy. Typically, it's easier to hire somebody. That's when we typically have used Oregon Erskine. We've used a couple other companies, but they take care of getting it filed in the courthouse. They get the signatures. They've got the notaries. They do it all. That's a very traditional process. The optional process that I haven't personally got to use, but have seen this process used, is kind of what we call the open process. Again, you got to know what it is you're going to buy. Again, you have to have some kind of a legal description because if I'm going to come to you, I can't just say, hey, I'm going to buy some land. Here's some money. Are we all good? Right? Because it's all got to be filed in the courthouse. Where it differs here is instead of going through a formal appraisal process, you basically collectively, this body could collectively say, this is a fair market value based on information, right? You can use sales. I mean, a lot of this information around sales data, tax records, past projects that like we've just done on 98th Street, right? We have a lot of data. And you set what you think is a fair market value by unit. That unit's generally in square feet, acres or square feet. That's the two common ones. And then you go out to that group of property owners collectively. So I say by open, it's most of the time property owner A gets their stuff, property owner B gets their C, right? They may talk, they may not talk. C thinks that they should get more than A, and you get this kind of price war back and forth. What this basically does is says, okay, we're going to give everybody the same value per unit, whether you're lot A or you're lot G. Now, this only really works where you have like properties. So if you have an area of, fully developed subdivision, or you have all ag. Now, if you got an area where I've got a couple commercial properties and I've got some ag property and I got some developed resident, and I got a mixture, this process doesn't really work in that setting because the properties are dislike enough that it makes it hard to come up with that fair market value. Obviously, you will have some uniqueness. So we're talking about the base land. Somebody has a fence. Somebody might have something unique. I've ran into all kinds of something that's there in that area you want to buy that you didn't know about. I've had pet cemeteries. I've had stones that they brought over from Ireland. Literally, and put it in the spot. And how are we going to move this? So there could be those additional things, but fundamentally, you're paying everybody in a like way. And so this is, again, just an example. So these numbers are made up. So I don't want anybody to run out here and go, oh, this is what they're going to offer. So, in this case, we have a lot of this, right? We got a 2-lane rural road. We need to widen it. It's a 40-foot section line road today. We want to acquire, so we have 80 feet. So we, again, have everything we do. So we go out, we get our engineer surveyor. We say, hey, this section of road we want to do, and we need legal description. You got to prepare a survey. They got to prepare a legal description. When I say the city, collectively us, right? It could be done in a number of ways. And we say, okay, all these properties are alike. They're pretty much ag residential, or they're R1 or whatever. And the fair market value right now is $15 or $15,000 an acre for that kind of use. And we go, okay, break that down to a square footage price, which is about 35 cents a square foot. So we've got a value. So then I got this example. We've got 4 lots, right? Everything's on frontage. I use frontage. So one person has 200 feet, 150, 75, and 125. So we take and say, okay, I got 200 feet by 20 feet. That's 4,000 square feet. I'm going to apply my 35 cents an acre or 35 cents a square foot. Owner 1 gets his 1,400, so on and so on and so forth. They've all gotten the same value for the land. The only thing that differentiates them is how much they have frontage, right? In this case, we said, but this lot 3, they've got a 3-rail fence. What's that 3-rail fence? Well, the way we do it typically is we go out and we've done this on the right of ways we just did, right? We get 2 or 3 fence companies and we have them give us a bid, or septics, right? On 98th Street, we've got 2 or 3 septics that we have to move. So what we're doing is we've had septic companies come out and say, what's the cost to relocate this stuff? It wasn't in the right of way. Now it's in the right of way. We got to get it out of the way. What's your price? That's what we then settle and say, property owner, it was X dollars. This is the cost. We're going to give you your land value like everybody else, and we're going to compensate you for a fence. And it's a very open, and by open, I mean, this is all public, right? I mean, you don't have to do this behind any closed doors. Everybody knows it. Now, you probably get some, and it really depends on that group of people, how open they are to it. You may get the one where I'm never selling, I'm not ever going to do this, whatever. You can still use eminent domain in that case, right? I mean, you still, it meets the requirements of the law. Is there a public purpose for doing this, and how are you moving it forward? There's nothing in the law that says you have to go hire an appraiser to determine value. Now, again, if you're in KDOT says anything under $10,000, you can use the simple method, and over $10,000, you got to do a full appraisal. That's the initial offer. In a case where you don't have that, I mean, you don't have to do that. Obviously, you're going to get to, if you go to an eminent domain hearing, right, you're going to have at least 2 of the 3 people are going to be appraisers, and they're going to say, how did you come up with your appraisal? Right? So you can't just make up dollars. You're going to have some method that you can defend and support. But again, you can go through that. Again, I think really the benefits of this method, and it doesn't work all the time, and I'm not suggesting that you just go out and do a bunch of stuff, but I think this method would have worked really well for 102nd Street. I think it would have taken out some of the animosities that got created about buying and who was going to get things and stuff like that. I think it could work. There's portions of 98th Street that we know down the way we need to do. It might work in that. We've talked about a number of those. Other areas it's not going to work. It's just not as, probably just doesn't work as well. But the good thing is it's very transparent, right? I mean, everybody knows what you're doing, right? It's kind of open, it's as open as you want it to be, right? You can have all the discussions right here, right? Typically, you're not doing contract negotiations because you got different people getting different things. In this case, you're saying, okay, and if you decide and say, you know what, we miscalculated, it really should have been 40 cents a square foot, you do it across the board, right? You don't say, well, you get 40 and everybody else gets 35 because they don't know you're getting 40. You make it open, right? That's why I say it's fair for everybody. It's based on what you're acquiring in square footage. You don't need to do individual cost appraisals, which those can get, those are expensive and getting more expensive, right? $1,500 probably on a large project per appraisal. And then if it, again, in KDOT, if it's over $10,000, you got to get a review appraisal. That's another $800, $750, $800. So you get $2,000 or $3,000 in before you ever get started. And again, you're really looking at this on a group basis, not an individual basis. Those are really the big differences. So it's a method. I think one of our challenges here is how do we ensure that we're protecting our rights of way for future development purposes, really, right? Is that my concern is I see new houses get built and we say, oh, there's a 25-foot setback, but then we need 20 feet of right of way. Now we can go change all our setbacks. That's another option.
I
right?
like that option actually, but I feel like that would solve the whole, that when you were talking, I was like, well, why don't we just change our setbacks?
And that solves that problem. Yeah. But it doesn't solve it. It doesn't solve it for the utility pieces, right? Where we want the utility, preferably we want the utilities out of our way before we ever start a construction project, preferably, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're out of the way. But they can't get out of the way until the city acquires that, or they come in and they buy an easement right next to our right of way, right? So they go by 10 feet and put their, we'll use water line, right? And they go by 10 or 15 feet and they put their water line right there. And then we have to come by the right of way and then pay them to move their line. So we're buying the right of way and we're making them move the line potentially. That's what we've ran into a number of gas company, right? If they're in a private easement and they have to move a foot, you pay for that gas line. That's where the real cost comes in right of way related to utilities, is us paying for those relocations. And we, as I understand it, when it comes to they're in an easement of if they're in the right of way, we have control because we have a franchise agreement that says if you're in the right of way and we require it to be adjusted, changed, modified, et cetera, so forth, you, utility, must relocate your utilities at your cost. If it's in an easement up adjacent to the right of way, then that doesn't come into play.
So
then we pay for it.
I think I might have gotten a
Right.
little mixed up then.
Sure.
Could you, sorry to go back a little bit.
Nope.
Could you tell me how that relates to how close the new house is built to the road in the setbacks?
Well, the setback,
separate?
the setback is based. So a couple of things potentially happen. So one, if it's an unplatted lot, so it's unplatted land and we plat it, then we go back to those right of ways and say, you need to plat, dedicate, give, whatever words you want to use, this additional square footage across your property. And then your setback line is set from there. Setback is determined by zoning district.
Okay.
Generally, it's 25 feet probably is the most common, right? In a residential subdivision, it's less. It's probably
From
20
the edge of the easement, correct?
from the right-of-way line, wherever the right-of-way is.
Or right away. Sorry.
Right,
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
right. Now, there could be a right-of-way line and you could have a 15-foot easement and the house could be then 10 feet behind that easement. That's
But
possible.
it's the right of way line is generally the line you
Right.
work off for
Right.
setback.
Right, because you're going from public property to private property, right? That, call it the right-of-way line, call it the property line. I mean, they're both the same. If you say, generally you refer to the property line, it's the setback from the property line, but if it's on the street side, the property line and the right-of-way line are one and the same.
So do we need to change that? The.
Well, potentially, yeah. So then if I have a lot and it's platted, then I have to use that lot line to do it. And that's where maybe a change in the zoning ordinance also helps. But I still have the utility problems of what then happens. Because they could still come, a utility, of course, the utility could, they have authority to buy easement. All the public utilities have that right? And they can use all the normal processes for that. So
I think for me, the very obvious thing is we control what happens for utilities and so forth in the future where you lose control. And the thing that still sticks in my craw is the sewer line up on west of 110th Street where we don't have control of a section of it.
right.
It drives me crazy because we can't manage it like we manage the rest of our lines. It may be held to a much lower standard by the person managing it than what we would. And so this just gives us the ability to say, okay, 10 years from now, X thing happens. This is where it is. We don't have to worry about it. We don't have to pay to move things again. If BPUs come in and relayed a section of water line, and then 2 years later, we need to move the whole thing over.
Right. Swartz Road is a good example. I'll use that one, right? So BPU had water on the north side of the road, had a number of breaks, a number of problems in it. We wanted to repave the road, right? Very narrow right of way. So they went and they said, we're going to put a new water line in to try to get out of your way. So they put a new water line in, but they're 3 feet off the edge of the road because there's only 5 feet for them to work in. And sometimes it's slopes and other things. At some point in the future, that road would get widened and now that water line has to get moved again. Now they're inside our right of way. So typically they would pay the cost to relocate that water line. At least that's what you hope to happen. But there are some times that they would just go and say, well, we'll just go back and buy 10 feet of easements across here and give up the 5 feet. It's a management question as much as anything. And again, I'm not here tonight saying, let's go buy any particular right of way or any particular project. I'm trying to tee this up. I mean, we all know there's been several things come forward that can concern us as to where these things are going to go and how do we manage it versus letting somebody else manage the destiny. That's part of the question in my mind, right? We know the water line down 98th Street, really south of Swartz Road, is in horrible condition. It's undersized. It doesn't even have fire flow services, I don't think, and parts of that's 4-inch line. They really want to do something, but there's so many conflicts trying to figure out how to do it. There's not enough right of way. Now, down in that part, we have all kinds of, we go anywhere from 80 feet to 40 feet. It jags in and out. So it's not always we're going to just buy a straight, everybody's going to by this much, because if I already have 60 feet, I might only need 10 feet, and it may be on one side of the road and not on the other. It's somewhat project by project, but
Could you pull up the picture with all the utilities and
sure,
the signal and
right,
okay, so when on the right of way, the
right,
city owns the right of way typically.
correct.
That's what we're
It's
talking about, city
publicly
owned right of way.
correct.
Can we, and this might be a Lisa question, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Can we have any organization to where those go within our right of way? So if we're looking at some of the city roads, sorry, I tried to take a picture, some of the screens so I could remember. Some of the roads were, it was like 80 feet of right of way. So 98th Street is 80 feet of right of way. The actual street width is how wide? Just the street.
On 98th, I think we're using a 36 back of curb, so from behind the two curbs,
So 36 feet. And
36
so we've got about 24 feet on each side to work in the utilities, which is quite a bit. Is that not enough space?
for utilities.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Now they'll come along. I mean, I mean, right? And oh, we need this much more. We need this much more. The real thing is this is how much you have. Just, down on 93rd Street, the BPU is trying to tell the property owner they needed another 15 feet. We're like, you got 60 feet of space. We're putting the sewer in the middle of the road, so that's not a conflict, right? It's not a big project. There's not a bunch of other stuff, right? And they keep saying, well, he's got to give 15 feet. I'm going, why?
Right.
Well, that's our policy. Well, good for your policy, but you can put your water line inside the right of way and it will work without being under the pavement.
And that's kind of what I was wondering, like when we're looking at 24 feet on the side, so from the curb back into somebody's front yard. If we made them put the utilities, if we can, make them put the utilities in the further feet instead of the closest 10 feet, does that like going forward, does that kind of give us the space that we might need eventually for if we're going to widen a street or do street maintenance or need extra, does that give us a little bit more
Say that
say
again.
there?
I'm sorry.
If we use our franchise agreement
Right.
in controlling the right of way to where when we have the utilities come in or if they're moved or making
Right.
adjustments, if they're putting them instead of right up along the street,
Right.
10 feet back from the street, because there's still 14 feet on each side. And I might not be thinking about it. Then we have 10 feet of space there.
Right.
To work
If we have
on
the
each
right
side.
of way to work it, most of our main roads
Mhm.
are 40 feet total.
40 feet total.
Most of them are
Okay.
40 feet, so 20 feet either side. And in a perfect world, we'd have 24-foot wide roads. Most of them are 20.
Okay.
Right. Even the one when we redid the ones like that part of 102nd and that part of Swartz, right? We said get us 20 feet. For the most part, we got that. There's a couple areas where it's a little less because there was something in the way, right? A gas riser or something, that and you try to work around it, or the way the bridge was structured, built or something, right? So in that case, it sounds like 10 feet's a lot, but it may be 10 feet it's sloped straight up. And so there's without going in there and regrading, and then you got to get back. It's partially the grading as well as the locations in these things. And that's why, again, I'll use Edwardsville Drive. There we used a 60. So, right. Quote, 100 was the preferred, 80 was like perfect. On the Williamson Farm side of the road, we actually had from the center line 40 to 50 feet. So when they did the subdivision, I think they required them, I think there was 50. They had them dedicate 50 feet. If we would have gone 30 feet the other way, most of those houses, we would have been a couple of feet from their front doors with the right of way. Most people said, all right, that was a big hang up, because that one's one I did myself on the right of way negotiation. But we've said, how about if we turn that into a utility easement? still your yard, still your stuff. We don't have to, we don't have to clear that out. We can work within that. Some of that was power, right? Because the other thing about power is not the pole, it's the wires. So most of the time, the power company is going to take 12 to 15 feet if they have a pole. And all of that has to be within the easement. Now, they can hang over a road, but they can't hang over the private side. So typically what they do is they're going to set those poles about 6 feet off the back of the right-of-way line in those scenarios. So that then gives them the space on both sides of the pole for their wires. Because they do have to have both sides. They're different configuration. So they take 10 or 15 feet. And if the water company says, well, we got to have 15 feet, I would question the need for 15, but there's 30 feet right there.
I don't think I followed your division of the 24 feet. What you were trying to accomplish with, or what was,
Oh, so if I was going from from an 80 foot, if the road is 36 feet, then we'd have about, if my math is right, 24 feet on each side of the road under the right of way. So I was just wondering if we need to work our franchise agreements with the utilities to have the utilities more organized. So like Mike's saying, well, BPU's running water line 3 feet off the road over here, and then somewhere else it's over here. If we were more organized in the utilities, so they're not right along our street, but
so they're on the outer edge of the right away. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or something else. If we need to.
And that's really a
that.
policy. I don't
Yeah.
know that require. I mean, I think we have under our franchising, and again, the attorney can handle, but we have a right to manage our rights of way. We can have policies onto those. Now the problem is, just when you think you've figured them all out, kind of like tonight, something is, there's a high pressure gas line, which isn't regulated by us. It's an interstate commerce kind of deal, and it runs through there. Now everybody has to move stuff around. We got that in the industrial park. We ran into that several times. So, or you got a transmission line. So go ahead.
I was going to say that we certainly do. I think it's less of a franchise agreement sort of thing and more of a policy in our code that would say that our preference is that utilities be generally placed here. And we're saying it for this public reason of why we want that to happen. We can say generally that we have the right to tell you if there's a side of the road preferential to that specific street, that specific right of way that we want to do. You don't want to do something overall where you say everything that runs east-west, you only use the north end, or something like that. We couldn't anticipate something, but we can certainly put into the code reserving the right for us to have those preferences and for us to have those demands. Certainly they can come back and tell us why they can't do that, and then we can work with them, but we make it very clear what our preferences are.
Okay.
And we can do things like that.
I think that sounds like a potential solution for some of the utility issues that you described.
Right.
Where they're going back, and then now we need to go further and move them, and then they go further back, and so it keeps them kind of within those parameters. The concern I have when a couple of concerns with an open policy, which what I love about it is open discussion and not having to go into executive. I think that should be very limited, and transparency I think is great in that. How we come up with the value is something that I think would be maybe explored, but then where is the funding coming from?
Well, yeah, that's always, I mean, it's public dollars, right? I mean, whether you and we have, right? I mean, you can issue debt for acquisition of that real property for public. I'm not saying you should. You can use cash reserves, et cetera, budget for it. But, yeah, we don't have an endless bucket just to go out there and go buy a bunch of right of way. I think you would want to focus on, again, instead of waiting till after the project, I think you would look at more near-term project. You definitely want to look at your collectors, or really your right. I mean, that's where you're going to be doing your street improvements and widenings. You can look at sometimes they're just opportunities. Again, I talked about BPU water, and we have a subdivision. So the Groves, right, subdivision, and they're going to be dedicating their right of way. They'll be dedicating the appropriate right of way. So we have a 40-foot road. They're going to dedicate 20 feet. We have 2 lots from there to the corner, right, that they don't control. That's a place where we have a lot of water line conflict. It might be in a case like that to say, hey, we want to do this because we want to take advantage of this platting and purchase so we can get that water line fixed. I realize it's not our water line, but broken water lines tearing up our streets isn't a value to us either. So there could be times. I mean, I don't have some strategy say let's go out and start buying all right of way for all collector streets. We don't have enough money for that, right? But as somebody told me once, the one thing about it is it won't be, they're making no more land, and typically it doesn't get any cheaper, right? And that's probably true. Both of those are probably pretty true statements. But I mean, I think strategically we look at some of those things. Again, we now know 98th Street as an example. We have recommendation for funding, but we won't get into a KDOT process for some amount of time. Do we go ahead and get that right of way out of the way now, preemptively to that? We also know that is part of the area that Evergy's talking about for their utility getting a new circuit up north, right, coming up 98th Street. We know the water company has some issues. There may be spots like that where we say, this makes a strategically good time to do this. We have some property owners around town, and I've always taken this approach. If we're going down a road and say we're going a quarter of a mile, but you got somebody that has a piece of property, and that's 1,250 feet, but they've got 2,000 feet of frontage on that road, go get the full 2,000 feet. Deal with them one time, go ahead and, and it's easier, right? Because I'm going from property line to property line. The cost difference is generally, relatively negligible, right? Because most of your cost is in getting the survey done, so it doesn't cost you really anymore. It's all those things. So the amount you're paying for the additional land is fairly small, and then it's done. And you're not going back to the same party. Oh, I bought 1,000 feet and then come back and I buy another 1,000 feet. Oh, I'm going back buying another 1,000 feet. Generally, they don't like it, and almost always the price goes up. That's been my experience. So,
Can you use the economic development funds?
potentially. I mean, again, those funds, it's pretty, the money that comes into the economic development fund from IRBs, right? That's that money. There's some state statute, and I don't remember the exact wording, but it basically says it should be separated from your general fund and should go towards things of general economic impact to the community. Right? It's a pretty broad deal. We've used it to pave roads, but I don't think you pave a residential street. But we've done it for like 98th Street where you have a lot of commercial traffic and you needed to make improvements. Well, okay, you could probably make some argument that the widening of that road and improvement was good economic development thing. So somewhat on a case by case basis.
Well, and that was actually the next one thing that I was going to mention is the case by case scenarios, and,
Right.
and not maybe having a blanket policy of let's go over after any particular right of way.
Right.
But having something more, it's got to be like on our pacer. Is it coming up? Is it coming down the pike in the next 2 or 3 years?
Right.
And not like, well, maybe one day we might, because it's public funds, because we don't want to go into debt and pay interest. And especially when we're looking at capital projects, we're looking at new buildings that we don't really know how that's going to affect us quite yet. And so just keeping in mind that everything costs something, and yeah, it might be cheaper.
Yeah.
Land's cheaper now, but we don't want to buy up more than we're going to use in the very near future with tax dollars, especially with big projects coming up, and without knowing how the residents might might react. For 102nd Street, for example, you know, it would have been probably, we wouldn't want to go buy a lot of right of way and then hear from the residents, hey, we don't want this after we're
Right.
money into it.
Right.
You know, one thing that I think is a really big deal when we're talking about this, and we kind of breezed through it quickly in the presentation, is eminent domain. I would be really, really uncomfortable with even the idea of presenting someone with the threat of eminent domain for something that's not an imminent project. So yeah, maybe we'll use this 10 years down the road. Like, I don't want to threaten our property owners with taking their land for something that maybe we'll do eventually. I don't think that's fair to the residents.
If I'm not mistaken, what's really brought this to the forefront is the Evergy project, which is an imminent project. You know, we're talking months here as opposed to years. And so, you know, getting Evergy from wherever their station is over to Bonner.
Right.
And
Which
so that's an imminent project that I think we can use these type of thoughts for. And so, and there, it's an imminent project that you're looking at and considering what things might be 10 years from now. Because you may end up spending the same dollars on today's dollar, but it may be 10-year later dollars, which could be 25% more. And then you're doing it in a rush job at that time, or you're doing it in a different economic climate at that time. So I do think we have imminent projects to consider.
and I think that it's important when we're looking at the imminency of the project that it's to benefit Edwardsville and not Bonner Springs as well.
Well, we're going to benefit greatly from it over a long time.
Well, not yet. Right now, the only thing that Evergy is bringing energy to is Bonner Springs project, which is only costing Edwardsville infrastructure and money. And I don't know any. I haven't talked to any residents that are in favor of it. It's just burdensome to our residents in that area. But as far as using our powers of eminent domain to bring power to a Bonner project, I would have a lot of issues with that. I would have concerns even in an Edwardsville project, but especially for people that aren't thinking very, very much of us as neighbors in the first place.
Well, just for clarity,
Yeah.
I mean, I think you'll know my position. I mean, we've only had, you know, we've done a lot. We've only had 2 that have ever gone to an eminent domain case. One was the out of town provider right on 98th Street, which, I mean, I mean, they didn't even show up, and the other one was on a water line. So it is not something that I take lightly, or anybody when we're doing. I mean, it is last. I'm just saying from a legal standpoint, even that project part does play a role in that, right? I mean, the court still has to determine. I mean, they really do 2 things. The first thing the court decides is whether it's a valid petition, right? Does it meet the requirements under state statute to even use the process? Then the second part of the process is really appointment of the 3 disinterested persons, which from what I read, and I'm not the expert there, they don't necessarily have to be appraisers. And I think this last one, not all, 2 were appraisers and 1 was not. But I'm not the expert in that law. I'm just saying that I think there was a question, you know, is it something, you know, are you prohibited from it? And the answer is no. Now, related to the discussion there, I mean, I don't think we don't have the power. Again, I'll let Lisa correct me. I can't go use the city's power of eminent domain for the benefit of somebody else, right? That's not a permitted thing. No more could Evergy use its power, because it does have that power, to acquire something and transfer it to us. That they can't acquire the property and transfer it to us under the use of their powers, because their powers are limited only to the acquisition of land for the purposes of providing electricity. Because I mean, that's a discussion we had. I think the The imminence of this is the issue of you're going to have, yes, they're providing power. They're trying to connect that circuit, right? Yes, it will provide power over there, and that is a driving force, no doubt about it. But it's not solely to serve that project. It's the power grid and that whole area. Because KCP&L basically did nothing to upgrade or maintain the power up there. That's why it's all single phase. They never invested in any distribution power plants, right? So I know there's a lot where they're just trying to build power to get there. That's partially true, is they're trying to build that backbone. That really is what, when I say a feeder line, they're going from a substation, they're building a trunk, like that's what we call it, sewer, right? And so they're building the trunk, and then off of that, they're going to pull power to bigger projects, right? So they're going to take power into that 144 acres, and then they're going to distribute it internally. Or if you take the former hotel site, right, how do they do power there, or any of that land up there that's in the KCP&L service area? That's really what they're building. And again, I think the discussion, kind of back to early, is if they come in there and they buy wherever they buy it, right? They come in and they buy a 20-foot, they buy 20 feet of land, and they don't want to be back, they don't want to be back 20, if they said, hey, we're going to go buy 20 feet of land, but we're going to be 20 feet behind. I suggested that, right? So if our right of way is 20 feet and they leave me 20 feet space and then go do their 20 feet or some combination there, 10 and 10, that would be great. But the challenge is, how do they get to that? If there's a gap in between, they have no way to get from the road to their power line. And so they won't do that. So they're going to, again, just financial concern, whether it's them or anybody else, they buy right up to the right of way. And then we want to improve the right of way. And our only option is to relocate a feeder line at, $2 million a mile or whatever it is.
Remind me why we would be relocating it. Why would we be relocating a feeder line? And are we talking about
if we were to widen the
Yeah.
road or do anything and we need more space, then it's our cost.
And when would we be widening the road?
Oh, I don't know.
And that's my concern.
Right.
Right. And so when we're talking about using public funds, tax dollars, and we're talking about widening the road, well, when are we widening the road? Well, it's not even on our pacer test for quite a while to come, because it's like, if we're talking we're kind of jumping from policy discussion to a specific.
Yeah.
If we're talking about specifically Riverview, it's not on the higher need of our pacer test. So it's not going to be anytime in the very near future. And so it's an if or when. Now, if we're talking about should development come, I believe that should be the cost of a developer, not the taxpayers. And that's one method that I know you prefer, Mike, is when a developer comes, when somebody's building a subdivision or a commercial property, then our city policy, I believe, is we have them dedicate rights of way before we approve that. Yeah. And so I think that policy going forward is fantastic. I think it would be great to implement something along those lines with land bank properties as well, to make sure that we have whatever, if something's going into the land bank from our city, that we're capturing right of way before it gets resold. I think that would be a great policy. But when we're looking at potentially spending public funds for projects that are if and when, and then potentially could have been developer money, I don't know that we want to blanket policy put taxpayer funds there that we're going into debt for as a city, especially when we're looking at building improvements, capital funds, and a lot of debt in that avenue.
And I think it goes back to and I use that, but case by, in the sense of, I think there are times when it makes sense, and I would agree, just go out and buy one respect, it'd be great to have all the right of way bought and and it's fixed and it's done, would be utopia, right? Because I would never have to think about it again. But that's not real life. That's not how it works anywhere. I get that. But again, are there are there opportunities that may come up where that makes sense, you know? And the opportunity could be, and again, I'm not here to advocate for anybody, but you know, one of the things that we know we need and we've talked about is we really need three-phase power to our lift station. That will become problematic at some point. It's not right now because there's limited flow, but as flows pick up and things like that, it becomes, you know, ineffective operation, costs money, wears out quicker. You know, again, that would be nice to have that. It would, I mean, it will become a critical piece at some point. Is it critical today? No. Is it critical 1 year from now, 2 years from now? Probably not. But when you start having flows coming in from that, you know, again, it's all you've got to make lots of assumptions about development, right? I mean, if we had the hotel and all that going on and Compass commodity going on right now, we absolutely would have to be putting three-phase power in there almost
Right.
without doubt.
And that's why I was saying, if that's coming with development,
Right.
then let's work that into the developers instead of tax dollars.
Isn't there a policy now that if somebody up on the north end, if they develop, they have to pay a fee to access the sewer line?
Any new connection
Any
to
new
a sewer,
connections has to pay a fee to access that.
only if they're connected to the, so when you
Right.
connect, if you connect, you pay you basically pay an impact fee is kind of what it's called, because
Could
you
the
build
same
the
thing-
line this big, right? So,
Could the same thing be done to the electric line?
well, we don't own the electric, so if we own the electric, yes, but we don't. So I don't know how we would implement that.
They charge you.
Yeah, they do.
The utility charges you. We can't because
Absolutely.
we don't own the utility.
Right.
I would think, Mike, this is something, and I know we're basically in our minds, we're thinking of the power coming down Riverview. I mean, let's just be flat out about it. I know it costs almost $7,500 just for them to set a pole, and that's not a feeder pole. You know, poles have different prices
Sure.
depending upon how much, what they're doing. Personally, I would think it would be cheaper to buy the right of way now than have them put their poles where they put them, and we widen the road 5 or 6, 10 years. Then we have to pay to move every single one of them poles. How many poles are they going to be putting down that road? I mean, there's going to be a bunch.
Well, if we're forcing them underground,
Yeah.
that's even more.
Well, you can't. Feeders can't be. I mean,
Yeah,
transmission lines
anything in a
can't be.
35 kV, a feeder can be.
I mean, but transmission lines.
Transmission, no,
No.
but this is not
You can't
transmission.
put them underground. But so I mean, I'm just thinking this is something to think about. If we have to come back and buy the right of way and move the poles, that's a chunk of cash, man. I mean, that's a lot of money. I mean, I'm not in favor of buying the right of way today, but you know, it's going to come to some point where we're going to have to figure out, do we want to, you know, do it now and make them put them in this part, or just let them put them here? You know, I think it's something to think about.
I don't think we're talking about today, but we're talking within a couple months.
Right. I mean, that's what I mean. Yeah. But I mean, I'm talking about that today, but then in the future, how much more is it going to cost to move them in the future versus making them put them here now so that they don't have to move them again?
Well, and one thing I think Mike was saying is we were discussing the underground utilities, so there wouldn't be poles. Like they would have to move them, but it would be underground.
No, there's going to be poles because transmission lines cannot go underground.
But this is feeder or below that they're putting a circuit in, not transmission.
They're not going to put a line from that substation to feed all the way over to Bonner.
Right.
With
That's feeder line. It's it's like 12.2 or 12.4 is what they're talking about.
I'd have to research that some more, but okay.
And so, and that it was just kind of along my concern is even we're talking about, you know, if we might widen the road, which maybe we will one day, but it's not on the near future list. And if we do, it likely be for development, which I think a policy standpoint should be if it's for development, developers should pay for it. But I would 100%, when we're talking about policy, because when you talked about eminent domain, you said, well, you know, it goes to the court. Well, but the first step is it comes before our city, and it
That's true
goes to
too.
our city policy.
Right.
And I think our city policy, when we don't have a project, an Edwardsville project that's really coming up soon that we have a timeline for, I would not support any policy that would threaten homeowners in any part of our city with eminent domain when there's not an Edwardsville project that's on the calendar coming up in the next very near future.
Right. One of the things, and I haven't seen it, but I certainly have kind of made a request, and I just don't think they're there yet, is I'm going to call it a preliminary to schematic designs of, they've done a lot of surveying. Where do they envision putting the poles, right? Because they'll have all that surveyed. So how many poles, where are they going to be, assuming that they have to work within the existing right of way, right? So, I mean, that may help us in some of these discussions. I don't know.
Well, and like Ms. Dion was saying earlier, if we can be more specific in our, not our franchise agreements, but in our right of way, and saying your utility needs to be in this section of it, because I feel like we've been pretty lax in those, that might be the way to start before we, let's see what we can do there before we cost tax dollars, right? And I know there's a timeline and things like that, but I just feel like when it comes to property rights of residents of Edwardsville, those should be protected, and it shouldn't be a flippant like, oh, let's go after that, because that's people's land. They own that. That's the American dream, is to own property and not have the government take it from you.
But to be the 10th man on that, we represent every citizen in Edwardsville. And so if that power line bill gets us set up and moving and having a preset destination for those utilities and saving the money for the future, saving money in the future, investing at the present time, and for tax growth, for tax-based growth and all that type of thing, or like the development over the Groves development, that benefits everyone in Edwardsville. I think it's fair to consider all people, not just that one landowner that may be a little opposed or irritated or whatever about having some lines go through their property. Where because something that it's hard to remember is that you represent everyone, and you represent the present and the future of the city. And so there's just a lot to consider, not just a single landowner that may object to having something done on their property that's for the good of the entire city.
That's fair. And there is a balance to it. There's a balance to, looking out for the good of the entire city. But I do think just in the United States of America and Kansas, like, property ownership is such a huge deal that we don't want to take that lightly. And we want to make sure that we're being on the cautious end of that, and not over grabbing and overstepping or overspending. So.
Well, I mean, again, the purpose of this was really a great discussion on right-of-way management, some of the challenges that come with it, right? It seems a lot easier until you got your hands in the mix. So, I think that was really the primary purpose here. Yeah, we know we have some things setting out there. I think they're worth having discussions continually on, well, what is it? Again, I think to Mr. Scott, so what's it? For example, what would we estimate cost if we did acquire the land? What would we get? What's the benefit, right? So if we didn't do this, what are the, and we had to pay the expense, let's say, to get 3-phase power to our lift station, what's that cost? I mean, we've looked at a little bit of that, but not really packaged it all up, and partially just because relative to Evergy, I don't know all of what they're doing yet, right? And so, and it's not that they're trying. I mean, they've been communicative. It's just that they're still kind of in design phase there. But again, I think there's other places that this comes into play. Like I said, do you go get 2 lots? Do you buy the right of way on 2 lots in order to upgrade a water line so that we're not tearing up our road and things like that. It might be worth it in those cases. I'm not saying that is the one, or there could be, something else where there's a plus. Maybe, hey, we want to co-locate a sewer line with the gas line. Quite honestly, when we did the lift station up north, one of the things we did is we had to bore under the highway, right? And we put a 24-inch pipe through the ground. And we had an 8-inch force main. And we knew someday we'd need another second force main. So we put that in there, put caps on it, right? And then we ran some smaller pipe in there because at some point somebody could come along and say, hey, we need to get fiber optic from that side of the road to that side of the road. Oh, you got this pipe listed. What would you lease to? Because the cost to bore a 12-inch hole for one 8-inch line versus 24 for all of that was, it was $300 a foot, I think, or something, and it probably would have cost us, 180 to 220. So yeah, there were some costs, but on the realm of things, it was a good investment. And I think that's really this discussion is, are there times when it's a good investment for us to do these things? And it's not about, like I say, it's not about let's just go buy all the right of way. That's never
Right.
the thing. Is there investment? That investment may be, what are those future costs gonna be for relocations, or what is the investment of, hey, I need to get something done, the investment of my road not getting torn up 15 times, even though the water company, right, has a water break and they come fix it and they do a good job. But if you cut that road up 10 or 15 times, I don't care how many, you're right, it falls apart. I'd rather not have them out there closing a road and digging it up. If that means I got to buy 300 feet of right of way, it might very well be worth it. But
Right, and in those that it
yeah.
makes sense in some situations and
Sure.
in future planning. And one thing that I liked about the open concept was the transparency, and you can discuss with neighbors and say, hey,
Right.
is everybody on board with this? And
Right.
that's why I liked that more. So
Right.
hey, if everybody's on board, and that's why I kept pushing okay,
Right.
but the eminent domain I feel is when it crosses the line.
Yeah.
So that always I mean, you guys
Right.
know that I'm always very hesitant for any eminent domain, but or even the threat of that.
Right.
But then making sure we're being as fiscally responsible as possible, that we're not over jumping, overspending, or spending too far out in the future that maybe a developer would have covered it otherwise. And so there's, depending on the situation,
Sure. Okay. Certainly, if you have other questions, comments, I'm ready.
Oh,
Oh, we have.
Item number 5, consider award of bid to Air Cleaning Technologies related to the purchase of an exhaust capture system for the Edwardsville Fire Department, and authorize the city manager to enter into a contract to acquire said equipment.
Thank you, Mayor. Evening, council members. In front of you tonight is to summarize a finalization to an AFG grant that we applied for in the fall of 2021 that was awarded a first round after the environmental studies and the station studies in August of 2022. We are asking for $2,450 or the 5% matching grant for the project to seal out a $45,000 AFG federal grant to put a direct source exhaust capture system in the existing fire station here in Edwardsville. What this will allow us to do is to capture and completely remove diesel emissions from the buildings that we have currently. Our building was built in 1989 prior to these systems coming on board. When we went out for the grant process, we looked at the cheapest and easiest system to implement that did not require a large amount of remodeling or changes to the existing station, and a system that was completely able to be disassembled and relocated should we build a new system. So we went out to the bid process and found 2 of these direct source capture systems that met NFPA approval. One was Plumovent, and the other one is MagnaGrip. We sent out the projects to both the regional managers for both. Plumovent sent back 2 bids, one from a company called Air Cleaning Technologies here in Bonner Springs. The other one was TNC Industries in New Hope, Minnesota. And then Magna Grip was headquartered out of Cincinnati, Ohio, in their group. We recommend that the council approve $2,450, the matching 5% grant, to authorize the city manager to purchase the Plumovent system from Air Cleaning Technologies in Bonner Springs. The reason why we picked Bonner Springs, besides not only the best and most appropriate bid, they are also local, but they have done the contract for 30 departments that have built these systems in the metro area. So this is not some new company that has not dealt with this system before. They are very experienced. If there's any questions, I'll take them now.
Madam Mayor, I make a motion that we authorize the spending of $2,450, matching towards the air cleaning technology bid of $45,200.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call roll?
Bishop,
Yes.
Shriver,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Adams.
Yes.
I think Mike, you had
Yeah, a couple quick things. So just a couple updates. As the mayor knows and Mr. Bishop knows, we have been going through the RFQ process. I think that process has gone very well thus far. We had 8 total responses. The committee selected 4 to interview. We've completed those interviews and are conducting additional background checks. Again, I think our goal is to at least be back before the full body before the end of the year with a recommendation of firm. We'll be a ways on finishing it up, but just be able to make that public announcement. So I want to thank those people that have been serving. They've been doing a great job, spending evenings, et cetera, doing that. You have the other information, but I do want to reiterate that we have received additional federal funding and grants. The one I spoke about before for the trail sidewalks, et cetera, that would kind of tie this property towards the city park. The second one is the extension of 98th Street to the south, from basically Kansas Avenue to, people refer to it as the old city property, which is actually the location of the new Groves project. So timing may work well with that. We had requested about $4.5 million. Ultimately, we received just over $4 million. So it's not unusual that you don't get all the funding you want. And I've been through at least a half a dozen of these, and I've yet to figure out what the process is, because every time the process is a little bit different. But that's okay. That is the way it works. That now those recommendations go to what's known as the TTPC, which Mr. Adams serves as, I believe, still the co-chair on that committee, and then on to the MARC board. I just got tonight that ERP is having their annual Thanksgiving meal that they do, and they always invite the public safety, the city, and elected council members to that. So if you are interested, it will be on November 22nd, starting at 11 a.m. It says it goes to 8, but I'm not sure there's any food left by then. So I would recommend earlier. But that's something they've hosted for years and have always invited others, and especially the city. They've been a great partner for us. So the last item I have, if I can ask Chief Mathies to stand up and come join me, maybe Mayor, if you would like to come join us too. Get this out of the sealed here. Take some pictures here, but Mark, I'm gonna call you Mark, even though Chief I know is the right word, but wanted to provide this to you for your 15 years of dedicated services to the citizens of Edwardsville, almost longer than me. We'll argue about that later. For his leadership and commitment to the Edwardsville Police Department. I think it's very clear that, Mark and I did really kind of start here together. I think it's fair to say that among many things, the police department had many needs to be addressed, no money, which was kind of true of the city as a whole, a lot of issues. And As I told somebody just the other day, I'd put this department up against any department in this state or anywhere across this country. And what really makes it is Mark and his people, they know what it is they're doing every day, right? I mean, they all know what the mission is. They know what they need to do. They know the policies. They know all those things. And that's why we stay out of trouble. We have good officers. I mean, I don't know how many of them hold, almost all of them hold a degree, advanced degrees. I mean, so we have a well-educated, we have a well-equipped, well-trained police force, and that's what we want every day. And so I just want to say thank you, sir.
Oh, thank you.
15 years, and
Been an
Mayor
honor.
may want to come or have a picture or make some comments or other. Yeah, please.
I should have worn my.
I don't know, he knew we were
Don't sit down.
Underdressed.
Oh, thank you very much. Honor. Yeah. We might have to do the shovel thing.
I hate to say it, give you a few words, but I guess we'll give you a few quick words.
Oh, it's been an honor. Yes. I've worked with familiar faces for all these years, and I was hired before Mike. So, yeah, on a permit basis. Yeah, we were just talking about that I was sworn in by a mayor wearing shorts, so we were talking about that. So that's something unique that'll stick with me forever. But it's been an honor. We've been blessed to have great people. We got this far because of the people that we have, and it's through the leadership of this governing body in whatever form it's been over the years that we have been able to get to the place we are today with that organization. And I think there's many good things to come, and we're going to continue to progress. And I hear that in all discussions of right-of-ways, whatever it might be, it's about progression, and that's what we did with the police department for 15 years. It's been my pleasure to be chief of police here. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Service to our city.
Tomorrow, actually,
A long
my day.
time.
Is it? Yeah, tomorrow.
You gonna get the day off?
No.
Yeah.
It's probably gonna be snow, ice, something. He's gotta be.
Skip the vote on that?
I'm gonna overrule it.
Very good.
I don't have
That's all your
anything
comments?
further to add.
Ms. Dehan. Zach? Chief Mathies?
Nothing further, thank you.
Chief Whittem?
No,
CE?
Usually every 2 weeks. Since I raised her.
Welcome to Edwardsville.
I may need to now, there may be a hiring I need to reconsider. We were having sunny, warm, beautiful weather.
Yeah, really.
I hire CE, I go out of the country, and I come back and it's gonna snow. There's one leakage to all of that.
You could have brought some of that weather back with you, Michael.
I would have brought the weather there, it was a little wet, but I would have taken, I'll take 70 and wet.
Okay, Councilman Adams, do you have anything for us today?
Chief, congratulations. It's been a good run together. I really, I can't forget about a year ago when Kansas City, Missouri announced they were getting body cameras for their police department. I thought, really? It's been at least 10 years we've been wearing body cameras.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just an example of the leadership that we have from the chief and protecting both our citizens and our employees with those body cams and all the other technologies that we've gotten over the years, and the grant writing that you've done through the years is exemplary. And so greatly appreciate all the service. And I remember when one of the gentlemen that was sitting on the hiring board with me, I think it was a former chief in Shawnee or deputy chief or somebody. And I said, how long will it take for this chief to turn this department around? And he said 7 years. I truly believe you did it in less than half that time. And so I greatly admire and appreciate your leadership. So thank you very much.
It's funny, there was an article, I think it was today or yesterday, and I think it was Overland Park, and they were mentioning that they were gonna start giving Narcan spray to their officers to carry opioid overdoses. And I went, really? It's not just automatic? But I was surprised when I read that.
We're very blessed in Edwardsville to have the chiefs that we have. So, did I read that there was no responses for a stonemason?
That's correct. So we issued an RFP and we sent the RFP package directly to the a couple of different firms. I want to say, between 5 to 9 firms received the package directly with the due date being whenever the due date was, and we did not receive any responses back. Well, I take it back. We did not receive any completed responses back. We did receive 2 responses back saying that they respectively would decline the opportunity because they were so behind on materials. So for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be doing a little bit of more targeted outreach to see if we can't. I just don't know if some of the vendors are not used to the RFP process or if they knew exactly what to do. It's fairly straightforward, but a little bit more targeted outreach to the firms who've done work in the city, so I'm familiar with them and they've been licensed and have had projects here, so we can keep moving on that masonry work that needs to be done at the cemetery.
Okay, great. Thank you, Zach. That's all I have.
Councilman Bishop?
Oh, congratulations, Chief. You do a fine job. We're a police officer. No, I want to just mention the mayor and I and Mike and 3 other citizens are working on the RFQs for our projects, and it's going rather well. I mean, we had some good firms come in, give us some good presentations, and a lot of good questions asked by the collective group. So I think we're doing due diligence to do the best we can for our citizens. I think it's working out well. That's it. Thanks.
Councilman Shriver?
Congratulations, Chief. The list of accolades, I know everybody's kind of covered them. Not kind of, I'm not taking that lightly. We can't forget your IT skills. That's not been mentioned because I just know that being the police chief here, what you took on, what you've done, the high caliber of your trained officers, and alongside all of that, you've taken care of so much IT. I mean, that's a lot. It is a lot. So I thought that needed to be mentioned too, because I know 0 about IT. So
I can't even spell IT.
CE, I have something for you. Well, I brought it up or asked about it September, October, going up 110th Street, the line that's just hanging by a thread.
Oh, yeah. Still there.
It's still there. Terrifies me. So if you go up north on 110th, right past the curve, right past the church there, I don't know that, just watch, and it's to your right. There's power lines just hanging by a thread.
It's a spectral cable here
Mhm.
during the windstorm in December. It's a cable line printed onto a Evergy pole, and Evergy provided a temporary fix to get it up off the road, after 4 days. It was up to Spectrum to get in there and fix it. Last I heard, it was just on their list.
Oh, they were just here. Fixing the internet. So I don't know if it's awful to look at. It looks like it could just come down at any minute. So I don't know what you can do, phone calls, whatever the case may be. So sorry, just wanted to mention that once again.
I noticed it too. It's like, what's it take to get them out there? Maybe just cut it down, let it fall on the street.
No. Right.
Somebody lay under it, don't you?
And just wanted to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving, a safe one too. That's all I have.
Good. Councilman Scott?
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. Also, Chief, congratulations on your tenure here. And I'm truly glad that you're part of our team. And I think that we're all blessed to have you here, and your leadership has been previously mentioned. So we are the benefactors of having you part of our team. So congratulations. Thank you. Also like to publicly announce or congratulate Officer Sean Robinson and Officer Stephen Gray for their recent promotion to Master Patrol Officer. That's awesome. So congratulate to those two officers. And then I also want to mention too about Chief Witham. I know you continue to teach, on your days off, and you promote within, just like the rest of our departments. But you were redesignated as Chief of Police or Chief Fire Officer back in August, I believe, with the Center for Public Safety Excellence. So that's incredible. So I appreciate that. And then just also want to make that clear that our fire chief is one of 1,764 accredited chief fire officers and only one of 230 that's accredited fire marshal. So again, we have some great talented people that's, in our leadership group, and we are truly blessed to have this leadership here. So thank you guys for all you do. That's all I got.
Very good. Since our last meeting, we had the Spooky Express, which was a fantastic community event. I know a lot of city staff went and worked long hours, and it showed. We had our police department, our fire department, Zach, Mike. I mean, there were just so many hands involved even before the event took place to make it a success. And the community, I know, really loved it. It was a great event this year, even great weather. So, thank you to everybody that participated in that and helped. It was great for the kids and everyone around. We did have our Edwardsville mobile pantry just last Saturday. We're thawing out from that still. This was a record high in registrations. It beat the last one even. We had over 205 families registered, and that wasn't including helping the folks at the high rise or restocking Von Trent. With that, we served over 900 people. 12,839 pounds of food. And so as we get closer to the winter and holiday season, with Thanksgiving and Christmas coming around the corner, it's just good to keep in mind those in need in our community and not take for granted what we do have. Couple fun things coming up. Mayor's Christmas tree lighting, if you want to put it on your calendars. Zach, December 6th. I don't know why I keep getting the third in my head. December 6th. But prior to that, we have a gingerbread house contest this year. And so if any of you want to get your gingerbread house crafting together, or your kids or grandkids, Zach is posting that on the Hotshot and the city Facebook page, because we'll have all of those turned in prior, and then the competition will be at the community center that evening. And so I expect everyone to participate. Anyway, we had a great Veterans Day. Thank you so much for the veterans in our community that serve our country, to our chiefs and people who keep us safe. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Right on. Oh my goodness. Get up.
Oh, yeah.
Jesus.
We're in November 1.
I'm chuckling at it a little bit. I'm kind of chuckling at it a little bit. You make a call down there and they bring back cases of it.